Hello, I'm Bryan Rives, Director of the UIS Performing Arts Center, and it is my privilege to welcome everybody who's viewing to this pre-show discussion before the performance of Rent, appearing at the UIS Performing Arts Center on Thursday, November 18th at 7:30 p.m. Before I introduce my panelists, I would like to acknowledge that this discussion will most likely include topics of sexuality. The comments provided by our panelists are their personal views and not those of the University of Illinois Springfield. Also, we want to say that if you have not seen the musical Rent, and that's great that you're seeing it for the first time, but how could you have not seen it at this point? It's been out for 25 years, but if you have not seen it, this discussion will have spoilers, and we are moving forward with the assumption that the people viewing this broadcast are familiar with the musical and have seen it at least one time. With me today is Karen Whitney, who is the interim chancellor of the University of Illinois Springfield. We also have Reggie Guyton, a professional actor employed by the Abraham Presidential Museum and a member of the board of directors of the Springfield Theater Center. And as I said, I am Bryan Rives, director of the UIS Performing Arts Center. At this time, I'd like to invite each of our panelists to basically help set the scene for where they were in life when the AIDS epidemic first came to light in the United States. So you know what their age is, also to the level that your comfort, how you self-identify. And so we can start understanding, because our panelists are assembled here to provide a variety of ages and experiences related to the AIDS epidemic. So I'll go first. As I said, my name is Bryan. I identify as a 55-year-old white cisgendered gay male. In 1981, when the epidemic was first coming to light, I was a freshman in high school. So from the 80s through the mid 90s, I would say in my life journey, I was in high school and college and really just starting my sexual journey in life. And obviously the whole AIDS epidemic had an impact on that. So then I'll throw it over to Chancellor Whitney.
Yeah, thanks, Bryan. My name's Karen Whitney, and I'm a 62-year-old white lesbian feminist and baby boomer. I'll put that in there. In 1981, I was in college at the University of Houston in Texas. This is before the internet. I was very active in LGBT work in Houston. I was on what was called the switchboard. This was before the internet, where we used the phone, not the cell phone, the landline phone, because that's all there was. And I did work. And so I remember in 1980 going to my first workshop on something that didn't have a name, but wonderful, beautiful gay men were dying. And we didn't know why. And we were doing workshops because people were calling, and it was the LGBTQ switchboard of Houston. And that was my first workshop before it even had a name. And so for all my years when I was in Houston, I volunteered in that capacity to help keep our community together, because that was also a time, and I'm so proud I get to call this almost like a period piece now, for some people to even say they were gay, to say the words out loud. You were in fear of something horrible, terrible happening to you, being kicked out of your home, loss of employment, being assaulted, being incarcerated. Because in Texas, up into the late 1980s, early 90s, the police were coming into bars and arresting people. The military police, where their military bases, would find people in the military and arrest them. And it was against the law, really, to be gay. And that was the environment in the 80s from which this piece came from. Did you want me to talk about the 90s also, Bryan, or we're going to talk about?
Yes. Just to set the stage, though,
yeah.
Rent premiered off Broadway in New York in 1996. Right. The concept for the show started in the very late 80s, early 90s. So, because these musicals take years to produce, but the 90s was really the production cycle of Rent.
So in this period, there was this great, real fear of existing and at the same time coming to ownership of who one is. And being in college, it was that ownership. And I'm very out about this. I'm out about being, being a lesbian. I'm also out about counseling. When I was a sophomore, I sought counseling at the College Counseling Center, and it saved my life because of the stress and the pressure. And the word marginalization is an understatement of the overwhelm of coming to terms with being a lesbian in Texas in the 80s with HIV and AIDS and all the things wrapped into that. It was overwhelming, and there was no internet. There was a great sense of isolation, a great sense of you're completely alone. If you think about this, there was no cable really at that point. It was just coming up. Cable was just developing. So you had 4 or 5 stations, and maybe you were on that beginning of cable, but even words, I mean, the Phil Donahue show, I don't know if you remember the Phil on TV. He was the first TV show that actually brought real people in for a real discussion. Prior to that, and this is where Rent was tremendous, there were images, if you were gay, you were either a homicidal killer or a victim, a minor character victim. So that's what I grew up with as a kid and even in college. And I mean, I was fired because I was a lesbian out of one job. Now, the fun thing there, don't feel sorry for me. I've had a great career. I just went and it got me out of a place and I ended up getting an even better job. So, but that's traumatizing. And that was the 80s and 90s. Rent was this incredible, powerful moment. I'm not like you guys. I'm just a regular person who loves to go to theater. But Rent, it seized AIDS and it seized being LGBTQ. And it said, I am not a victim. I'm a hero. And I'm a hero in this story. And you can like it or not like it, but I have power and agency and energy. And then for it to be such an award-winning piece. And back in Houston, when it was premiering in New York, which is like another country anyway, you're in 2 different, it was a lifesaver to wrap around. I'll stop there, but this is an iconic piece that really, I think, galvanized an entire community, LGBT, in this country in ways that was incredible and special. And I'm so thankful for what it did, because it, I think, enabled so many other things to come after it.
Thank you, Karen. Reggie, how about you?
Thank you, Karen, because that was amazing to just be able to sit and listen. So my name is Reggie Guyton. I am a child of the 90s. I was born at the end of 1990. Please don't hate me.
No.
So the AIDS epidemic was something that I, sort of grew up around, but coming from a very strict religious household, it was not something that I was generally exposed to until I actually had a relative pass away from complications of AIDS. So at a certain point, I was aware in the late 90s, early 2000s, the gravity of this situation, but also didn't really have a whole lot of answers because I was still young. It wasn't until, I want to say, sophomore year in high school, and I don't know if my teacher was supposed to do this, but we had a movie day, and that was the movie. We chose Rent, and being able to see, now granted, the movie version is different than the play, or the musical, but being able to see people in a different light and not have their situations or their choices stigmatize them, but be able to see who they are as a result of everything that they're experiencing, it is something that really just tugged at your heart. It really just got a hold on you. And it's been a special place in my heart ever since. And then I want to say my junior year of college, so let's say about 2011, 2012, somewhere around there, we had the opportunity to do Rent at the Muni. And I loved it. I was Squeegee Man. I loved being in the chorus and doing the choreography and dancing and really just communing with the cast. But what I can say is being in a theatrical experience like that, it really bonds you because these characters become a part of you. And Rent is just a microcosm of all the different people that you can and will meet along the way, whether they are poor or impoverished or people of color or immigrants or queer, whatever it may be. You're going to see those people, and to have the opportunity to not only portray and live in these characters' lives was beautiful, because it also undid some of the damage that you would have from being a child of the 90s and seeing all these representations of queer people, whether they were depicted as murderers or victims or just grandiose stereotypes. It was a way to really just get down to the meat and bones of those characters and their lives. And I love that. I love Jonathan Larson for that. And being able to, as a queer man, I didn't identify, but that's fine, a queer cisgendered man, to be able to see and relate to so many different people while also getting an understanding of people who are a little bit different than you. I'm forever indebted.
And I would, for me, like I said, I was in high school, and what I was hearing in the press was just negative against gay people. This was the gay man's cancer. This was the gay cancer. That sense of fear, that sense of, I was just a couple of years away from being sexually active, and all of a sudden it was like, well, you could do that and you can die, and everything was about, condom, wear a condom. And you talk about, like Karen, you talked about going to the show and how great that was. I remember when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and there was still this very negative stigma about being gay. Even going to a show like Rent was one of those things where it's kind of like, oh my gosh, okay, what do I say if somebody sees me here? Oh yeah, I'm a theater major, I got to see everything type thing. I remember going to see La Cage aux Folles on Broadway, and I was just like, oh, just nervous. I was sitting in the front row, and I'm like, oh my gosh, And nowadays, as a 55-year-old man, I'd be like, I don't care. Yeah, I'm going to go see a show. So it's just that difference. I just find amazing. But let's set the stage again for this show and the time period that these characters are living in. And Karen, you probably have the better memory of this, but I could start us off by saying, for the young people out there that are watching this and have lived through the COVID crisis, AIDS was not the type of thing where all of a sudden the government said, oh, we're going to shut down, we're going to get this, we're going to get a vaccine, we're going to get this out there, this is priority one, we're going to get the economy going. No, this was the Ronald Reagan years. I don't think Ronald Reagan even said the word AIDS for many years. And this was like, well, yeah, those queers, just stop having sex. And that, I think our communities felt really exasperated the problem. But Karen, can you give us more perspective of that, since you were more politically aware of age?
Yeah, it all, history and context is everything. And, again, for just the serendipity of it, patient zero on AIDS and HIV happened to be a gay man, and the way it just happened, it's sexually transmitted. At that time, for a period, people did not know. And we can relate, though, to COVID and AIDS and HIV in terms of, we all see now the heroic and the disappointing ways people are acting today with today's pandemic. There have been people who have been heroic, and there are people who have been just horrible. Well, with AIDS and HIV, it was the same thing. Ironically, Anthony Fauci started his career in AIDS and HIV work. That's where he started. The guy is just a saint in my world. And today he is the calming leading voice today's epidemic. But it was so fearful. People were afraid. The fear factor, I can't get in, because people were dying. I mean, and young people, young, vibrant, terrifically beautiful. The poster title was gay men. Now, the honest truth was a lot of women, again, over time were dying. People in the sex trades were dying. It was sex trade. But there was this whole notion of, can you shake hands? Some of these things are familiar. Can you shake hands? Can you be in the same room? Can you hug somebody? There's so much, there are some familiar patterns. However, how this started was immediately wrapped into the incredible homophobia and the sexism of our time as well. And it wrapped around also at a point where the moral majority, as a fan favorite word, the religious right, who were really, who took this population and took this moment to galvanize their beliefs, which, I mean, I have a great reverence for the sacred and for religion. I don't have a reverence for bigotry. And it was bigotry and it was hateful. And the language around, well, certain people deserve to die. That's what we were wrapped around in. And it did take a lot of courage. The thing about being gay, and you talk about this, Brian, not only was it overwhelming to be gay, it was overwhelming if you were courageous to be, you're not gay, to be an ally, because it has to do with our sexuality, which by its nature is fluid and personal. So even allies were suppressed. It took really into the 90s and then into the 2000s for allies to be confident and to say, I'm an ally. And, you know, if you're a hate monger and you think I'm gay, well, that's your problem. That took a long time to get to. And you know, in different parts of the country, there were no protections for employment or for housing, or the police looked, in fact, there were, again, I was saying, even in Texas into the 80s, they were part of the problem. So you have all these regional aspects as well. And something like Rent was just so overwhelmingly successful and powerful. And I knew people who would go from Houston to New York, and then it traveled, and it was this moment break from all that was terrible and tough. I'm trying to give voice to it, but it's really hard to explain how chilling it was. And because it is, for many people, was easy to pass. You're gay, you know it, but you passed it straight. You passed it, and so it was a really difficult time. And you know, again, I can't say the loss of life was incredible, and particularly being in college in Houston, which had one of the largest gay communities. Chicago, Houston, San Francisco, New York were the largest 4 communities, and it was devastating. And I'm just so pleased, Reggie, to hear your story and how far we've come. And it's a memory. I'm so glad it's just a memory for you.
And I want to add to that, Karen, that, you know, people need to remember, especially in the early 80s, there were doctors that would not touch an AIDS patient or treat an AIDS patient.
People were rejected from hospitals. They were rejected from healthcare. They weren't allowed to go to church. Families rejected. It was truly a modern day pariah. And it just showed how immature, and we still are, around sex. And the fact that it was sexually transmitted, once that became clearer, it still took forever. You're right. Thank you, Brian. The rejection on that was, it was a blight on our society.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to ask this question of Reggie, because Reggie, you're an accomplished director, an actor, performer, and everybody, you know, when they think of Rent, they think of that iconic song, Seasons of Love. And 525,600 minutes. Hey, I should audition. But what I find interesting, as somebody who's seen a ton of musical theater, that this iconic song really doesn't fit in with the structure of the musical. And by that, I mean, it's the entr'acte, so to speak, the start of the second act. All of the performers are standing in a straight line on stage. They're breaking the fourth wall. They're talking directly to the audience. I would argue they are not in character. They are, you know, simply a chorus that's singing this song about love and acceptance, and how do you measure the meaning of life. And I would argue that a song like that normally would take place at the end of a musical to wrap it all up in a nice little package and bow and say, oh, this is all about acceptance and love, and, you know, the audience leaves humming the tune. But Jonathan Larson made a conscious choice to break the fourth wall, line up the cast, and sing the song at the start of the second act. Can you give us, from a directorial performer viewpoint, why that is, and how that affects the audience mentally going into the second act, especially when it's revealed that, you know, Angel DeMont, you know, dies of AIDS?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I can't speak for Jonathan Larson, but I do like to try and take a peek inside of his mind, not just with this story, but also with Tick, 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 Boom, which is another story that is actually coming out on Netflix, if it isn't out already. And just keeping in mind that the theme of the song in general is just seasons of love. How do you measure a year in the life, you know? And with an epidemic like AIDS and HIV, that is something that, from the outside looking in, you truly don't see a lot of love and care and consideration there. And suddenly time is fleeting. Like you said, Karen, there were so many people that were just gone. They'd be here 1 month and then the next week they'd be gone, you know, and as a result of that, we have so many queer elders that we do not have to this day. And I think largely is incredibly disheartening to think about sometimes, but also knowing that the legacy from there is that we're carrying on with love and resiliency. And I think that's also echoed in the sentiment of Seasons in Love. You have so many, I don't want to say mundane, but ordinary or mundane or casual moments that are mentioned there in sunsets and cups of coffee. How do you measure love? And I think that gives people a moment to really take in the message and the lyrics and the words and just say, okay, these people that are in this show are still living their life. They're doing the best that they can to continue on with their life, even though things are difficult and now they have to change around their life, whether it's regarding AIDS or regarding poverty or regarding just accessibility. You carrying on with your life and carrying on with love, finding the little moments where there is love is so important. And it's almost encouraging and a challenge to the audience, I think, to view the rest of the story and maybe even the full story as a labor of love, because you didn't get here with, you know, just anxiety and depression. And, you know, while those things are there, there's also love still outstanding in all of that. And I think it almost would be cheapened. I think it will also almost cheapen the story if you were to close it that way. Because even at the end of the show, there's a few lines from other songs that are woven in, you know, will I lose my dignity? Will someone care? There's only us, there's only now, given to life or given to love, or life is yours to miss. All of these lyrics are so important because they tell different sides of the story. But love is the thing that covers all of it. Love is the thing that holds all of it when it is difficult or hard or saddening. Love is the thing that keeps us together and reminds us that we still are here. We can keep going. I think that's
That's
it.
fantastic. I also find it interesting that, you know, the show is based on Puccini's opera La Boheme.
Mm-hmm.
And in La Boheme, the main character, Mimi, comes on stage. He has tuberculosis. Am I saying that right? And she... tuberculosis. I can't. Oh my gosh, I can't say the word.
We get you, Brian.
She's sick. She's sick. But anyway, what I want to say is, in La Boheme, it ends with Mimi with Rodolfo discovering that Mimi has just passed away, you know, seconds before, and he's screaming out her name, Mimi, Mimi, as the curtain is slowly, you know, closing, with this idea that death is death. It's over. Mm-hmm. She's gone. But in La Boheme, I find it interesting that Angel DeMott dies in the middle of the second act. So there's this opportunity for the cast to deal with the aftermath and explore that. But then in the final number of the show, kind of final number curtain calls, Angel runs on, and I would argue runs on in character, and the audience is not acknowledging the actor's performance, so to speak, but is acknowledging Angel's return and that they love Angel and they accept Angel and they miss Angel too. Do you have any thoughts on that, on how that's treated? Because it could have just been a straight curtain call. Oh, and Mr. So-and-so is playing the role of Angel DeMott, you know, comes and he bows. But it really feels to me Angel was returning to the community.
You know, I have difficulty summing up my feelings about that because I love the way that it ends. And I think that if we were to just make it a regular curtain call, we take the life out of the whole story, you know? And it's like, oh, we're just watching this like picture movie, blah, 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 blah. You know, it's a memory relived. But when Angel comes back on, there's such an emotional jerk that you feel. And it's like you're recalling it's almost like a memorial, and almost like, oh my gosh, like this person lives on, you know? And I feel that so many of us in the queer community have an Angel. There is someone in our life that has played this role of just exuberance and unapologetic boisterousness in the sense of being their true and authentic self. And you can't forget people who are their true authentic self. So that's why that is so important and so memorable, is because like you want this person to be very much with them. You want to celebrate, and in a way they are, even if they're not actually physically with you.
And with that, I'll bring this to a close and say that I think we obviously wish that everyone who passed away from HIV/AIDS was still with us. They're in our hearts, they're in our memories. They will live on. I am pleased to see that the rate of HIV infection continues to decline in this country. It's still a public health issue, but hopefully one day we can say we actually have the cure for AIDS. But if you want more information about HIV/AIDS, and especially HIV testing and PrEP, PrEP is the sort of the preventive medicine to help prevent the acquisition of HIV. And PrEP often it's an expensive cocktail, or expensive pill, but it can be had at a substantial discount and sometimes for free. And for more information about that, you can contact the good folks at the Phoenix Center at phoenixcenterspringfield.org. Or if you are part of the UIS university community, please reach out to the UIS Gender and Sexuality Student Services Office at uis.edu/gender sexuality student services. A reminder, Rent is performing at the UIS Performing Arts Center on Thursday night, November 18th at 7:30 p.m. Tickets are available at uispac.com. Once again, my thanks to Chancellor Karen Whitney and actor Reggie Guyton for joining us. And we look forward to seeing everybody at Rent. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Trans rights are human rights.